Enter God mode in 2026 means you stop living like life is happening to you and start operating like you are the force that bends outcomes. Because God mode is not arrogance. It is total internal authority. It begins the moment you realize that nobody is coming to save you, explain things to you again, or give you another perfect opportunity. And from that moment forward, every excuse becomes an insult to your own potential. Entering God mode means radical ownership, where everything in your life, your money, your body, your status, your discipline, your failures, your wins, is your responsibility and no longer negotiable. This is the year you stop asking how you feel and start asking what must be done. Because feelings are weather and execution is climate. God mode is built when you decide that comfort is the enemy and convenience is a trap. When you stop designing your days around pleasure and start designing them around progress. It is waking up and moving with intent before the world distracts you. Training your body like it is a weapon. Sharpening your mind like it is a blade. And treating time like the most expensive currency you will ever touch. Entering God mode means you no longer wait for motivation, because motivation is for beginners, and you operate from identity instead, doing the work because this is who you are now. It is the shift from hoping to dominate to expecting to dominate, because you have put in the reps when nobody was watching. God mode is silence, not noise, focus, not chaos, structure, not emotion, because power grows best in disciplined environments. This is the year you cut distractions without nostalgia, people without guilt, habits without excuses, and lies without mercy. Entering God mode means you stop consuming information for entertainment and start consuming it for leverage. You stop scrolling and start building. You stop fantasizing and start executing. It is understanding that confidence is not spoken, it is felt. And it comes from knowing you can rely on yourself under pressure. God mode is when your word becomes law to yourself. When you say you will do something and it gets done regardless of mood, fatigue, or resistance. It is when you stop negotiating with weakness and start enforcing standards. Entering God mode means you accept that life is competitive, whether you like it or not. And instead of complaining about the game, you master it. It is building money, not for validation, but for freedom. Building strength, not for attention, but for capability. Building discipline, not for aesthetics, but for control. God mode is emotional mastery, where anger becomes fuel, fear becomes direction, anxiety becomes urgency, and none of them control you anymore. It is understanding that suffering is unavoidable, but stagnation is optional, and you choose the pain that builds instead of the pain that rots. Entering God mode means you stop trying to be understood and start trying to be understood and start trying to be undeniable. It is when results replace arguments and outcomes replace opinions. God mode is long-term thinking in a short-term world, patience in a dopamine economy, consistency in a culture of quitting. It is when you stop chasing quick wins and start stacking unbreakable systems that compound over time. Entering God mode means you stop waiting for permission to be great, because nobody ever gives it, and greatness only recognizes action. It is when you become dangerous not because you seek conflict, but because you are disciplined, capable, and unshakable. God mode is built through boring days executed perfectly, through repetition without applause, through showing up when nobody cares. It is when you stop outsourcing belief to others and become your own proof. Entering God mode means you accept that loneliness is part of elevation, because fewer people can walk where standards are high. It is understanding that not everyone deserves access to you, your time, your energy, or your vision. God mode is when your environment reflects your ambition, your routines reflect your goals, and your daily actions reflect your future self. It is when excuses sound embarrassing and laziness feels painful because you know what you are capable of. Entering God mode means you stop playing small to stay liked and start playing big to stay honest with yourself. It is the year you stop surviving and start dominating your own life, financially, physically, mentally, and strategically. God mode is not a switch you flip once. It is the mode you enter every single day through discipline, through focus, through execution. And once you enter it, you realize this was never about becoming better than others. It was about becoming impossible to control, impossible to distract, and impossible to break. And in 2026, you do not wait. You do not hesitate. You do not ask. You enter God mode and you operate at a level where your life finally reflects the power you always knew you had. And once you are inside God mode, you begin to notice something unsettling and empowering at the same time. The world did not change. You did. And that is why everything responds differently. People who once ignored you start paying attention. Situations that once overwhelmed you now feel manageable. And problems that once felt impossible become logistical puzzles to solve. God mode sharpens your perception. You start seeing patterns instead of chaos, leverage instead of effort, strategy instead of emotion. Because clarity is the side effect of discipline applied long enough. This is where excuses truly disappear, not because you force them away, but because they no longer make sense to a man who understands cause and effect. In God mode, you stop lying to yourself, and that alone puts you ahead of most people, because self-deception is the most common form of weakness. You no longer pretend you are tired when you are undisciplined, unlucky when you are unprepared, or stuck when you are simply avoiding discomfort. God mode means you become brutally honest with yourself and surprisingly calm about it, because honesty gives you control. This is where you stop needing external pressure, deadlines, threats, or validation, because your internal standards are stricter than anything the world could impose. You wake up with intent, not urgency, knowing exactly what must be done and why it matters. God mode turns your mornings into momentum instead of hesitation, your days into execution instead of reaction, and your nights into reflection instead of regret. This is where your body becomes an ally instead of a liability, because you train it to obey commands instead of cravings. Strength becomes normal, endurance becomes expected, and weakness becomes something you correct immediately instead of tolerating. God mode means you stop treating your mind like a playground and start treating it like a command center, guarding what you consume, what you think, and what you allow to influence you. You stop feeding yourself garbage information, pointless drama, and emotional noise, because you understand that inputs shape outputs, whether you like it or not. In God mode, your focus becomes aggressive. You protect it like a weapon, because distraction is one of the few things that can still defeat you. This is where you stop multitasking and start finishing, because completion creates power and half effort creates frustration. God mode trains you to sit in discomfort without flinching, to work when bored, to think clearly when tired, to move forward when uncertain. You no longer panic when things go wrong, because you expect resistance as part of progress. This is where emotional maturity shows itself, not through softness, but through control, because you're no longer hijacked by impulse, ego, or insecurity. God mode means you do not need to announce your plans, because you are too busy executing them. Silence becomes your advantage, mystery becomes your shield, and consistency becomes your reputation. You stop seeking approval from people who have not built anything, because their opinions no longer carry weight. God mode rewires your relationship with time. You stop killing it and start investing it. You stop wasting it and start respecting it, because you finally understand that every hour either compounds or decays. This is where long-term thinking becomes natural, where you willingly sacrifice short-term pleasure for future dominance without feeling deprived. God mode is where patience stops feeling like waiting and starts feeling like positioning. You begin to see that most people quit right before momentum would have rewarded them, and you refuse to be one of them. This is where resilience hardens into something permanent, because you have survived enough hard days to know you can survive the next one. God mode teaches you that confidence is quiet and insecurity is loud, and you choose quiet strength every time. You stop reacting to provocation, criticism, or noise, because you are no longer operating at the same emotional altitude as the average person. This is where your standards rise automatically, not out of ego, but out of respect for your own effort. God mode forces alignment. Your actions must match your goals, or the internal friction becomes unbearable. This is where you cut off habits that no longer serve you without nostalgia, because you care more about who you are becoming than who you used to be. Entering deeper into God mode means you stop hoping for luck and start engineering outcomes, stacking skills, resources, and relationships with intention. You no longer leave your future to chance, because you understand that randomness favors the prepared. God mode is where discipline turns into identity, where doing the hard thing stops being heroic and starts being normal. You no longer wait for perfect conditions, because you have learned that perfection is a myth used by procrastination. This is where pressure stops feeling heavy and starts feeling familiar, because you have trained under it long enough. God mode is not about being flawless. It is about being relentless, adjusting quickly and refusing to quit. And as you continue operating at this level day after day, you begin to realize that this mode is not something you visit. It is something you live in, a baseline of intensity, focus, and control that separates you permanently from the version of yourself that used to hesitate, doubt, and delay. And living in this state long enough rewires not just your habits, but your identity. Because God mode is not a switch you flip for motivation, it is a standard you refuse to drop. This is where most people fail to understand you, because from the outside it looks extreme, obsessive, unnecessary, but from the inside it feels clean, simple, and aligned. You are no longer scattered across 10 desires, 10 fears, and 10 distractions. You are locked onto one direction, and direction is power. In God mode, you stop negotiating with weakness. You do not ask yourself if you feel like doing the work. You ask yourself what the work requires, and then you execute. This is where discipline becomes automatic. Not because it is easy, but because hesitation feels heavier than effort. God mode removes internal debate, and that alone saves you years of wasted energy. You no longer romanticize struggle, you respect it, you use it, but you do not complain about it. Because struggle is simply the toll for becoming uncommon. This is where your emotions stop controlling your schedule. Sadness does not cancel work. Stress does not excuse laziness. Boredom does not lead to escape. Instead, emotions become signals, information you acknowledge and then override with action. God mode is where you learn that consistency beats intensity every time, and that showing up daily, even imperfectly, compounds into something unstoppable. This is where you stop looking for shortcuts and start building systems, because systems do not rely on mood, they rely on structure. Your environment begins to reflect your mindset, cleaner spaces, tighter routines, fewer distractions, because chaos outside eventually creates chaos inside. God mode makes you ruthless with your time, not angry, not rushed, but precise, because you understand that every yes is also a no to something else. You stop overcommitting, you stop people-pleasing, you stop explaining yourself to those who do not need to understand. This is where boundaries become sharp and non-negotiable, because access to you now has a cost. God mode also changes how you experience pain. Setbacks no longer feel personal, they feel instructional. When something fails, you do not collapse, you analyze, adjust, and move forward. Ego dissolves here, because ego slows learning, and learning is your advantage. God mode teaches you humility through competence, not submission, because you respect reality more than your own pride. You stop blaming the world because blame offers no leverage, and leverage is what you seek in every situation. This is where responsibility becomes freeing instead of heavy, because once everything is your fault, everything is also fixable. God mode strips away entitlement. You stop believing you deserve results without sacrifice, respect without achievement, or comfort without contribution. This is where hunger sharpens again. Not desperate hunger, but controlled hunger. The kind that keeps you alert and moving. You no longer chase validation because progress itself becomes addictive. God mode also changes your relationship with other people. You stop needing to dominate conversations, prove points, or win arguments because your life is doing the talking. Silence becomes confidence, restraint becomes strength, and patience becomes intimidation. This is where you stop broadcasting your struggles, because you understand that attention is a currency and you spend it wisely. God mode trains you to delay gratification so effectively that temptation loses its power over you. Distractions still exist, but they no longer pull you because your purpose outweighs them. This is where loneliness stops feeling scary and starts feeling productive, because solitude becomes a tool for clarity, not a punishment. God mode is where you realize that comfort is the enemy of growth, but unnecessary. Suffering is stupidity, so you choose hard things that pay off. You stop confusing motion with progress, busy work with achievement, and noise with momentum. Every action is filtered through one question: does this move me forward or keep me the same? God mode also forces you to confront fear directly: fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of success, and instead of avoiding it, you walk straight through it. Courage here is not emotional, it is mechanical. You act despite fear until fear loses relevance. This is where confidence becomes earned, because you have proof, receipts, and evidence stacked behind you. God mode means you stop waiting for permission to live the life you want, because permission is never coming. You become proactive instead of reactive, strategic instead of emotional, deliberate instead of accidental. This is where you stop seeing yourself as potential and start seeing yourself as a work in progress under construction every single day. God mode removes fantasy and replaces it with execution, because execution is the only thing that creates reality. And as you continue deeper into this mode, you realize that the real power is not dominance over others, but mastery over yourself. Because once you control yourself, very little in this world can control you at all. And the moment you truly understand this, everything becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. Because the path is no longer hidden from you. You know exactly what must be done, and you accept the cost without drama. Entering God mode in 2026 is a decision you reinforce daily. Through early mornings, hard conversations, focused work, and ruthless honesty with yourself. It is choosing progress over comfort, standards over excuses, and long-term power over short-term pleasure. This is where you stop asking if you are capable and start proving that you are. One disciplined action at a time. God mode is not about becoming inhuman. It is about becoming fully responsible, fully present, and fully committed to your own potential. Once you enter it, there is no going back to half effort, because you have tasted what it feels like to move with purpose. 2026 is not the year you try. It is the year you operate, the year you build, the year you become consistent enough that your life can no longer ignore you. And when you look back, you will not remember the comfort you sacrificed. You will remember the version of yourself you finally respected. Because entering God mode was the moment you stopped waiting to be powerful and chose to live as if it was already expected of you.